Every assassin ignored the human. It was the biggest mistake of their lives. The first shot came before I even had my coat off. It punched through the wall of the docking corridor, 2 inches from my left ear, and buried itself in the bulkhead with a sound like a cracking bone. I dropped flat before the echo finished. My heart was already slamming. My hands were already moving. That is the thing about training, your body decides before your brain does. I rolled left, came up behind a cargo container and pressed my back to the cold metal. The corridor was long and narrow, lit by pale blue strips along the floor. I counted the angle of the shot. High and slightly right. Shooter was elevated, maybe 40 feet back, positioned on the maintenance gantry above the docking arm. Not a professional opening. A professional would have waited until I cleared the choke point. That told me something. Whoever fired first was nervous, and nervous people make a second mistake quickly. I did not pull a weapon. I did not have one yet. I had arrived on the Conclave of Veils as a registered diplomatic courier, which meant I had passed through 3 custom scans, each one thorough enough to detect elevated iron in a blood sample. What I did have was the station map I had memorized on the 4-hour approach, a small ceramic tool disguised as a belt buckle, and the understanding that no one on this station considered me a threat worth preparing for. That last part was the only advantage that mattered. The Conclave of Veils was an orbital platform positioned at the gravitational midpoint between 2 star systems, technically belonging to neither, which made it the preferred location for transactions that no government wanted documented. It was elegant in the way that dangerous things often are, all curved glass and soft lighting and species from a dozen worlds moving through its corridors like they owned the universe, which most of them genuinely believed they did. I had been assigned here under the cover of cultural liaison for Ambassador Petra Caldwell, a real diplomat doing real diplomatic work 2 levels above me. My actual assignment came from a man named Garrison Cole, who ran a small and officially non-existent division of Earth's intelligence service from an office that appeared on no organizational chart. He had called me into that office 8 days ago, slid a single photograph across his desk, and said 4 words. Recover or destroy it. The photograph showed a data core. Inside that core was the schematic for something called a cascade ignition drive. The short version, as explained to me by a physicist I trusted, was that it could trigger a controlled collapse of a star's outer hydrogen layer. Not immediately, not obviously. Gradually, over 11 to 14 years, until 3 inhabited systems sitting within its radiation envelope became uninhabitable. Quiet genocide across a generation. The core had been stolen from an Earth research station 7 months ago. It had passed through 4 criminal networks since then, each resale hiking the price and the danger. Now it had arrived here on this station, where Madame Scythe, a Veth aristocrat with excellent taste and no conscience, intended to auction it to whoever brought the largest number to her private dinner table. 11 people were attending that dinner. I had reviewed every profile Garrison's office had assembled. All 11 were professional killers of various species and reputations. Several were considered among the most dangerous individuals operating in the known galaxy. Not one profile mentioned worrying about the human. I heard the gantry creak above me. The shooter was moving, repositioning for a better angle. I did not wait. I moved first, low and fast, covering the distance to the far end of the corridor before he could reacquire. I ducked through a maintenance hatch I had noted on the station schematic, pulled it shut behind me, and stood in the dark with my breathing slow and my mind working. Someone had known I was coming. That narrowed the problem in one direction and opened it in another. I moved through the maintenance tunnels for 6 minutes, memorized routes unfolding in sequence, until I reached a junction 2 corridors away from the primary reception hall. I could hear the gathering already, low voices in several languages, the particular sound of beings sizing one another up. I straightened my jacket, ran a hand through my hair, and walked out like I belonged there. The reception hall was designed to impress. Vast windows looked out on open space, stars sitting still and indifferent beyond the glass. Long tables held food from a dozen worlds, carefully arranged. The lighting was warm and deliberately non-threatening, which made every person in the room more dangerous, not less, because it meant they had all agreed to perform civility for a few hours before getting back to business. I took a glass of something pale and stood near the far wall and watched. The Veth called Verath stood near the center, tall and silver-skinned, wearing robes that probably cost more than my apartment. Veth were telepathic in a specific way: surface thoughts, recent intentions, emotional weather. They read minds the way you read a headline, not the full article. Verath had already made eye contact with every dangerous person in the room. He glanced at me once briefly and looked back at the HFY twins standing near the window. I was not interesting. I was furniture. The HFY twins, Kesh and Laura, were six-limbed and moved in the exact same rhythm, like one mind in two bodies. Their venom sacs were visible at their throats, a deliberate display of what they were. They whispered to each other when I walked past. I did not look at them. I do not speak HFY fluently. I speak it perfectly, which is a distinction that has kept me alive twice before. What they said, loosely translated, was that I looked like a clerk who had wandered into the wrong event. They found that amusing. The Dornak enforcer was named Gutstone, which was apparently a title as much as a name. He was nearly 3 meters tall, built like something geological, and he moved through the room the way a planet moves through space, slowly, with gravity, and without concern for what was in the way. He physically moved me aside when he wanted the space I was standing in. One large hand on my shoulder, a firm sideways pressure, and I stepped back because that was the correct response to a being that outmassed me by 800 pounds. He did not look at me at all. I noted that he favored his right side. Old damage to his gravitational node, a Dornak's primary offensive and defensive organ. Under stress, he would default to his left, and his right side would be half a second slow. Madame Scythe entered at precisely the hour she had announced. She was Veth, older than Verath, and carried the particular stillness of someone who had never been in a room where she was not in control. She welcomed everyone with individual words in their native language, which was a practice performance, and then announced that dinner would be served. The auction would begin at the 3rd hour, and the data core would be transferred to its new owner before the station's next rotation cycle. She looked at me when she said it, not a long look, just long enough to place me in the category of inconsequential attendants who required no further attention. Then she moved on. I was seated at the far end of the table, the seat for people who do not matter. I appreciated that. Dinner moved through several courses. I watched the room. I watched the micro-expressions and the weight shifts and the way hands moved near concealed weapons when someone said something that landed wrong. I watched Verath's eyelids. They moved slowly when he was actively reading, faster when he disengaged. He read everyone at the table except me. I kept my surface thoughts on exactly what I appeared to be, a slightly anxious junior diplomat cataloging cultural observations for a report no one important would read. If you fill your mind with the kind of tedious internal monologue that belongs to a person doing a boring job, a telepath stops paying attention. They want signal, not noise. I had learned that from a former Veth intelligence operative who spent 14 months working with our agency before returning home. Near the 3rd course, I knocked my glass sideways. It tipped, and I lurched to catch it, my hand landing briefly on the table near Kesh's place setting as I apologized with the kind of excessive embarrassment that feels natural for someone who knows they are out of their depth. She pulled her arm back with faint disgust. The micro-tracker I had pressed onto her wrist sheath was the size of a grain of rice. It would broadcast on a HFY military band in approximately 2 hours. I also learned, through 3 separate conversations I was not supposed to be having, that the data core was in Scythe's private vault on sublevel 3. The vault used a biometric lock keyed to Veth uppercaste physiology. Specifically, a dual arterial pulse rhythm that varies between individuals but stays consistent across the upper castes who share certain genetic markers. It could not be forced without destroying the contents. It could not be copied without access to Scythe herself. I did not need to copy it or force it. I needed Scythe to open it herself. I left the dinner table 40 minutes before the auction was scheduled to begin. I said nothing. I simply rose and walked toward the corridor, and not one person at that table tracked me leaving. This has always struck me as the most honest thing about my species. We are so consistently underestimated that our absence registers as quickly as our presence, which is to say, not at all. I moved through the maintenance tunnels again, faster now, taking the route to sublevel 3 that I had planned on approach. There were 2 security checkpoints between the service level and the vault corridor. The first used a standard VETH access protocol, outdated by 6 years, but Scythe Station had not updated its firmware, which I had confirmed by the specific flicker pattern of the corridor lights, a signature of older hardware. Our agency had cracked that protocol 2 years ago. I bypassed it in 90 seconds. The second checkpoint was a motion sensor grid calibrated for large-body species. It was looking for the physical signature of a Veth, a Dornak, a HFY beings with substantial mass and particular movement profiles. I moved slowly on the floor, taking 4 minutes to cover 12 feet. The sensor did not register me. It was not designed to look for something my size moving like that. I reached the vault corridor and settled into the shadow of a recess panel 16 feet from the vault door and waited. The tracker activated on schedule. The signal it broadcast was specific, a SRE military targeting frequency, the kind used when designating a location for a precision strike. Verath's personal security suite, which I had identified during dinner by the small device worn at his collar, would interpret that signal as a hostile targeting lock and respond automatically. His suite would lock down and trigger a general alarm within his bodyguard network. The sound of it reached me even through the walls. A distant alarm, then raised voices, then something heavy hitting the floor. Scythe moved within 40 seconds. I heard her before I saw her, quick steps, controlled but urgent, the kind of pace that betrays real concern beneath a composed exterior. She came around the corner with 2 personal guards, both Veth, both scanning the corridor with weapons ready. She went directly to the vault. She saw me standing in the corridor. She stopped. Her guards raised their weapons. I did not move. "You," she said. The word carried genuine confusion, which was appropriate, because nothing about her evening had prepared her for this particular development. "I need a minute of your time," I said in formal Veth. Upper caste dialect, the version learned in the kinds of schools that do not admit outsiders. Her expression changed in a way that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent years studying Veth faces. A very slight widening around the eyes. "You are a courier," she said, also in Veth, as though nomming the thing might restore it to its correct category. "Among other things," I said. I held up the data spike in my right hand. It was small, matte gray, unremarkable. "That core has a buyer it was not supposed to have. The beings it was taken from are not patient, and they are not subtle, and they will take this station apart looking for it within the next 18 hours. I can delete the schematic right now, and you can tell everyone the core was damaged in the chaos upstairs. Or I can release the transfer record showing where it was stolen from and who moved it, and then we can both see how the rest of this evening unfolds." She looked at me for a long time. I let her look. Humans are comfortable with silence. We grew up on a planet where silence sometimes meant the predator had already moved and you had already lost. We learned to sit inside it without flinching. Most species did not. Silence, for beings who evolved in complex soundscapes full of biological threat signals, produces unease at a level below conscious thought. It is not a technique I use cruelly. It is simply something I know. Scythe opened the vault. I inserted the spike. The deletion took 11 seconds. I removed it. The schematic that had threatened 3 inhabited systems was gone. "The chaos upstairs will resolve itself in a few minutes," I said. "I would recommend returning to your guests." She said nothing. I walked past her and back into the maintenance corridor. I was 40 feet from the exit when Vareth stepped out of the dark. He had not been part of my calculation, which is a sentence I dislike forming because it means I had made an error. Somewhere during dinner, beneath the careful noise I had filled my surface thoughts with, something had leaked. Not a plan, not a detail. Just a texture, the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who is watching everything while pretending to watch nothing. He had felt it and filed it away, and when his security suite triggered downstairs, he had not gone toward the noise. He had gone toward the thing that felt wrong. That was professional of him. I respected it even as I cataloged the problem. "You are not what you presented yourself to be," he said. "Neither are you," I said. "You've been running suppression on at least 2 people in that room since dinner started. I noticed the blinking pattern." He was surprised. He covered it quickly, but I had been reading Veth faces for 4 years and surprise looks the same in most species. A fractional loosening around the eyes, a half-breath caught and released. "Give me the spike," he said. "The data is already deleted. There is nothing on it." "Then you have no reason to keep it." He reached for it. I had known this was coming from the moment he stepped out, and I had spent those seconds preparing, which is exactly as useful as it sounds, and exactly as insufficient as it sounds when the person across from you is a foot taller, and has reflexes built by evolution into something that hunts across open terrain. I did not think about what I was going to do. Thinking is slow. I had trained in close quarters conditions for 8 years specifically because thinking is slow, and I had specifically trained against opponents with faster reaction times than mine because that is the actual problem humans face in a galaxy full of species that outmass and outspeed us. You do not try to be faster. You remove the advantage speed provides. Vareth's telepathy reads intent. An intent forms in the mind fractionally before the body moves. He would read my intent and move in response. That gap, the time between reading and physical response, was approximately 1/3 of a second. It was also the gap between one thought and the next, and if there was no thought, there was nothing to read. I moved on pure trained reflex, no decision preceding it, no image of what I was doing forming in my mind. My body had done this particular sequence several thousand times over 8 years, and it did not need my brain to supervise. My elbow connected with his center of mass. I dropped my weight and rotated. He went over my shoulder, which surprised him. His body had begun responding to a different movement, one that had not happened, because I had not decided to do it and therefore had not thought it and therefore he had not read it. He hit the floor hard. I had 2 cracked ribs from where his arm had caught me on the way down, and they informed me about it immediately and loudly. I breathed through it. He looked up at me from the floor. The expression on his face was one I recognized across species. It is the look of a thing that has just understood it was in different territory than it believed. I did not say anything dramatic. There was nothing to say that the moment did not already contain. I walked to the exit, and I did not look back, because looking back is a habit that belongs to people who are not sure they are going to make it. My extraction point was a courier shuttle docked at Bay 7, registered as diplomatic transport for Ambassador Caldwell's office. I reached it without further incident. The bay was quiet. Space waited beyond the dock doors, patient and enormous and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside those walls. I opened a channel to Garrison Cole's relay. "It is done," I said. A pause, then, "Intact or deleted?" "Deleted." Another pause. "Good, come home." The shuttle undocked and I sat in the co-pilot seat and watched the conclave of veils shrink behind me through the rear display. It was still lit from within, elegant and curved and full of beings who were currently discovering that the auction had fallen apart in an unexpected way. They would have many theories about what had happened and who was responsible. None of those theories would feature me prominently. I was the courier, the furniture, the background element in someone else's story. I was fine with that. 3 days later, I sat across from Garrison Cole in his office with a cup of coffee in my hands, real coffee, earth-grown, from a specific farm in the highlands of Ethiopia that I had requested as the single condition of my debrief. He reviewed my report without expression, the way he reviewed all reports, as though emotional response was a luxury reserved for people with less information than him. "Verath is going to file something," he said. "Through which authority?" I said. "He was at an unlicensed auction attempting to purchase weapons technology. He cannot file anything without explaining why he was there." Garrison made a small sound that on anyone else would have been a laugh. "The scii twins are claiming the targeting signal was a setup. They cannot prove it." "No." He set the report down and looked at me. 11 of the most dangerous operatives in the known galaxy in one room, and the mission was completed by the one they decided wasn't worth watching. "They will adjust their models eventually," I said. "They always do," he said. "Let's hope it takes a while longer." I drank my coffee and said nothing. Outside his window, Earth turned slowly in its own light, blue and quiet and entirely unremarkable to anyone who did not know what it had taken to build the people who came from it. We were not the biggest. We were not the fastest. We had not been in this galaxy long enough for most species to have formed a serious opinion about us. That was the part they kept getting wrong. They looked at our short history among the stars and saw inexperience. They looked at our small frames and saw fragility. They looked at our tendency to talk and negotiate and de-escalate and read it as weakness, because in their experience, the species that wanted peace were the ones that could not win wars. They did not know our actual history. They did not know what we had survived to get here. Every glacier that buried our settlements. Every drought that starved our populations. Every predator that outran us, outclimbed us, outswam us, and still lost. They did not know that we had spent 100,000 years being prey before we decided, in our quiet and methodical way, that we were finished with that arrangement. We had not come to the stars because we were strong. We had come because we were patient, and we were clever, and we had learned, a very long time ago, that the most dangerous thing in any room is not always the thing that looks dangerous. Sometimes it is the thing no one is watching. I finished my coffee, I put the cup down, I went home. The schematic was gone. 3 systems full of people who would never know how close it had come went on living their lives without interruption, under their own stars, in the particular ordinary way of people who have never had to think about what it would mean to lose everything. I was glad for that. That gladness was not dramatic or complicated. It was just the quiet, solid thing that sits at the center of the reason I do this work. Not because I am remarkable, because someone has to do it. And we are very good at being the ones no one remembers to watch.